Alors, la ministre de la Santé de l'Alberta, qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Bien, ce que je pense, c'est qu'on ne peut jamais au Canada, comme ailleurs dans le monde, prendre pour acquis la protection des droits des femmes en particulier, les droits des femmes en 2023 à choisir ce qu'elles veulent faire avec leur corps. Et j'aurai une conversation avec la ministre LaGrange sur cette question lorsque je lui parlerai.
Ça vous préoccupe?
Oui, je pense que c'est préoccupant. Je pense qu'au Canada, on doit tout faire et chacun a une responsabilité à le faire pour reconnaître et certainement défendre les droits des femmes.
C'est le vent américain qui souffle sur le Canada, monsieur.
So, I think most Canadians recognize that in 2023 it is important to both acknowledge and defend the rights of women to choose what they want to do with their bodies, and that will be a topic of conversation when I meet Minister LaGrange.
The NDP is introducing a private members bill to try and force the government to take action on pharmacare. I know it's not quite the end of the year deadline yet. Will the government be supporting this private members bill? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, two things on that. First, MP Davies did table a bill, like he tabled, I think, 12 bills in the last year or so. So, as a member of Parliament, he has a right to table a bill. The second thing is that I have been working with him and other NDP MPs to be preparing for the tabling of the bill that we promised to do by the end of 2023. This is something which matters to all the Liberal MPs and certainly also to MP Davies, and we'll look forward to tabling that bill as we promised by the end of the year.
So where are you on that legislation then? When do you expect to table it in the House of Commons, and where are you in the process of getting it written?
Well, lots of consultations yet to be completed and lots of work yet to be done to be able to table that bill by the end of the year.
Can you still pass it by the end of the year, though? The deal says pass the legislation by the end of 2023. Is that still possible?
Well, one thing we will certainly do everything we can is to table the bill by the end of this year. Something which we cannot promise to be able to do, but which we'll try to do, is to pass the bill by the end of 2023. This being said, this is a minority government. We don't obviously control the House of Commons, but we'll do all we can to be able to both table and to pass the bill by the end of this year.
Is Mr. Davies still involved in the consultations for the government's pharmacare bill? Is the NDP and Davies participating in that?
Yeah, we work together. I've been talking to him a couple of times. We're obviously speaking to and listening to a number of other stakeholders and partners who have a deep interest in this pharmacare bill.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Appointing you as Supreme Court Justice to replace Justice Brown.
Pardon me, can you start the question again?
What's the timeline on appointing a new justice?
I won't give you a timeline, but I can say that the process will be similar to the processes that we have already had for the appointments that we have already made.
What about the Brexit?
Donc, en français, je ne vais pas donner un échéancier, mais je peux vous dire que le processus va être semblable au processus qu'on a déjà eu pour les autres juges qu'on a nommés à la Cour suprême.
What about the backlog of federal judges? When will you get to that backlog of appointments?
We are working on that diligently, and we will continue to fill those positions.
Are you concerned that some cases could get thrown out because they're taking too long under Jordan's rule?
I'm always concerned, and so we do work diligently. I would point out that the vast majority of criminal law cases are actually done by provincial courts across Canada.
Do you regret sending that email to Frank Caputo?
Frank Caputo is responsible for his actions in the House of Commons. I'm a proud member of the Italian-Canadian community. Frank Iacobucci is an icon to all of us. He was a Supreme Court Justice. He was the Chief Justice of the Federal Court of Appeal. He was a Deputy Minister of Justice under Brian Mulroney's government and was one of the architects of the Meech Lake Accord, which I support. To see his impartiality questioned in the House of Commons, and to see Frank Caputo support that's part of the public record. To see him enthusiastically clapping and joining his colleagues in that attack on Frank Iacobucci's impartiality is something that's hard for me to watch. And he's responsible. He's responsible for his actions, and he owes the Italian-Canadian community an explanation. I have defended this community on a number of different occasions. I'm one of the people responsible for the apology to the Italian Canadians for the internment, and Frank Caputo should be responsible for his actions, and he owes an explanation to the community.
Do you think this is not a response for yourself, though?
Voulez-vous que le nouveau juge de la Cour suprême provienne de l'Alberta?
La tradition fait en sorte que le juge, il y a 2 juges de l'ouest du pays. Est-ce que ça va de l'Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba ou la Colombie-Britannique? Je ne sais pas. Ça peut venir d'ailleurs aussi, mais c'est un facteur très important avec d'autres facteurs.
Can you talk about the process that you're going to go through, though, in order to choose a new justice?
Well, I'll do that when we've actually announced the process, but it will be similar to the previous processes where we name a committee, we take applications in, and then that committee comes back with a short list that goes to the Prime
Le
Minister.
juge va être bilingue. Le juge va être bilingue.
Sans doute.
Quels sont les critères qui vont être importants pour vous? Je sais qu'il y en a justement, le bilinguisme, c'est la base, mais en 2023, est-ce qu'il y a d'autres choses que vous allez regarder?
On cherche évidemment, comme on fait pour n'importe quelle nomination à la magistrature, la qualité et la diversité. Donc, pour la qualité, très important de chercher la meilleure personne, les compétences intellectuelles, les compétences d'une juriste. Et c'est ce qu'on va faire. C'est ce qu'on a fait déjà. Je crois que les nominations qu'on a faites à la Cour suprême sont extraordinaires. Ils ont été très bien accueillis par la communauté. Et on va continuer dans ce sens.
Étiez-vous surpris par la démission du juge Blanc, quand même? Étiez-vous surpris par la démission du juge Blanc?
J'ai pas de commentaires là-dessus. C'était un processus interne de la Cour et je reconnais sa contribution au fil des années et je le souhaite le meilleur pour l'avenir.
Can you talk in English about what you're looking for in a new justice here?
Well, as in all cases, we search in all appointments to the bench. We search for quality and we search for diversity. We have, obviously we're looking for the best candidate, the person who brings a great deal of intellectual capacity to the court. And we're also trying to promote diversity. The bench has to look like the rest of Canada, and we have done that thus far. And I think if you look at the appointments we've made, you'll see that we've done that. Thank you.
What's your
Names are thrown for the clear of a potential public inquiry before interference.
No, look, right now we're having conversations with the other parties. We've opened the opportunity for parties to give us their thoughts. There are a lot of questions that we would put to them around terms of reference and names. It's great that they're putting forward names. Questions in terms of reference, and I think we need a really mature conversation about how we deal with national security documents and with national security information. If we're going to have a discussion about this, the opposition needs to be able to responsibly put forward ideas about how we navigate that. It's incredibly complicated. Oui, nous sommes prêts de collaborer avec des autres parties. C'est essentiel qu'il y a des propos responsables. On doit protéger notre information secrète, les informations avec les sécurités nationales, et on doit travailler avec un esprit de coopération, avec moins de partisanerie, et c'est bon que le Bloc québécois offre des noms, et on va parler avec des autres partis, et j'imagine qu'il va y avoir des autres propositions aussi.
Et vous, est-ce que vous en dévoilerez une liste de noms que les libéraux? Est-ce que les libéraux, vous allez en dévoiler une liste de noms?
Oui, j'ai regardé le nom. Le parti a reçu des propos et j'imagine que des autres partis avaient des autres idées aussi, des autres noms aussi.
Votre parti, est-ce qu'il va en dévoiler des noms?
C'est pas certain maintenant.
Are we talking about like a public inquiry at this point now? Is that where we're at? We're still talking about continuing with the special.
We've always been talking about a public process in terms of what form that public process takes. That's an open conversation. One of the things that I've said all through this is that we need to find a way to cooperate. At a top level, we have China and other nations that are attempting to interfere in our electoral processes and to disrupt our democracy. That's deeply concerning to all of us. We had independent inquiries that looked at 2019 and 2021 and determined that they were free and fair elections. But we need to make sure that we understand the nature of foreign interference, and most importantly, that the public has confidence in our national security system and in the mechanisms that we have to repel that. And so what we're asking for is for other parties to cooperate, work with us, and to help navigate, which is an incredibly complicated and difficult task, which is to give the public confidence to answer these questions, but not reveal national security information in the process.
Est-ce que ça peut être fait M. Holland? Les partis demandent que ça soit fait avant la fin de la session. Est-ce que c'est possible qu'on ait finalement, que le gouvernement décide de faire une enquête publique et de trouver la personne qui va présider d'ici la fin de la session?
C'est notre intention de continuer aussi rapide que possible. La situation est urgente et c'est évident qu'on doit faire une solution rapidement. Et ça, c'est notre intention.
This issue has really dominated the session, for months now. As it's approaching summer, how are you guys feeling about the way it's gone and the politics around this and where you're at in the polls, just kind of big picture after being hammered by this for so many weeks and months?
Well, what I would say is that this has been too much about politics and not enough about substance. That there seems to be a partisan zeal, particularly in the approach of the Conservatives in this, that is unhelpful and I would say inappropriate. When we're dealing with national security, we have to be level and measured. We're talking about our democracy here. There's no person who's been elected to this House who hasn't dedicated their lives to protection of our democracy. That's the starting point. We need to operate from that premise. We need to reduce the partisanship. We need to reduce the politics. And we need to focus on making sure that people have confidence in the institutions that protect us from this interference. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oui, le EMPP, en français, l'acronyme c'est difficile pour moi, mais oui, c'est possible, mais le nouveau changement de la politique inclut la possibilité pour des organisations spécifiques pour comment dire referral? Pour faire une référence pour des personnes. C'est ouvrir pour des francophones, mais il n'y a pas une voie spécifique sur ce programme pour des francophones. Mais j'ai bonne nouvelle dans les nouveaux programmes, la sélection RC, les ensembles, le category-based selection, avec une voie spécifique pour des francophones. Mais c'est un programme différent. C'est possible pour des francophones avec le nouveau programme pour réfugiés, mais ce n'est pas spécifique.
Vous allez passer en comité des langues officielles cette semaine. Il y a eu des questions de fraude. Comment est-ce que vous jugez la fraude Comment est-ce que vous déterminez qu'il y a eu des cas de fraude? Parce qu'on a vu que votre ministère a commis plusieurs erreurs, notamment dans le cas des étudiants indiens.
OK. Alors, les étudiants étrangers, spécifiques?
Oui.
OK. C'est possible en anglais. OK. It's important for me to get, there's a lot hangs in the balance for the people who are engaged in this. So we will be putting out an official statement very soon. I expect this week, but we have to just finalize a few key details. When we're dealing with the very serious situations surrounding fraud in Canada's immigration system, we have to look at every case specifically. We receive hundreds of thousands of these applications, but we're still individually going to pull out all of the applications that are subject to a removal order right now. I expect there will be a process that engages teams from both IRCC and CBSA that will give an opportunity for all of the affected students to demonstrate whether they knew or did not know whether there was a fraudulent scheme that was admitting students to Canada on the basis of fake letters of acceptance. Those who knowingly broke the rules will be subjected to the consequences outlined in the legislation, including removals. And I think everyone appreciates that those who deliberately or knowingly broke the rules should find themselves in that position. However, I'm hearing significant stories for people who are bearing enormous mental health concerns right now that do not deserve to be removed from Canada. In fact, some of them are extremely talented people. Some of them actually came and complied with the terms of their study permit and completed their studies and only found out that they were admitted to Canada on false pretenses when they sought to apply for permanent residency. We will find a solution so those people can remain in Canada and have a fair shot to apply for permanent residency.
How do you plan to repair that?
But by giving them access to a specific process where senior officials from both CBSA and IRCC will consider their individual case rather than have them just go through the ordinary process. Under the ordinary process, despite the fact that a person may not have considered their own application, may not have done their diligence in terms of verifying their own letter of acceptance, the person is still responsible for their own actions. There's a unique fact pattern here. There were students who were exploited and taken advantage of by a fraudster. A lot of the students did not know, and I've heard stories about the efforts of those students when they realized that they were subjected to fraud rather than being complicit in fraud, actually took steps to notify the authorities. There's no moral blameworthiness in a case like that, particularly for students who completed their studies in Canada and have something to give to our economy. We want to provide a resolution for people who find themselves in that category, but it's difficult to treat every single case identically when they don't have identical fact patterns.
Il y a plusieurs provinces qui refusent maintenant de détenir des migrants pour le compte de l'Agence des services frontaliers, parce que ça se fait...
Les services frontaliers?
Oui, il y a...
C'est un nouveau mot pour moi. Frontalier?
L'Agence des services frontaliers.
Qu'est-ce que c'est français? Oh, ok. Je m'excuse.
C'est pas grave, c'est pas grave. Donc, il y a plusieurs provinces qui refusent maintenant de détenir des migrants pour le compte de l'Agence des services frontaliers. C'est quoi le plan maintenant pour ces migrants-là? Où est-ce que vous allez aller? Puis, il y a des provinces pour lesquelles, avec des prisons, des centres de détention, les contrats arrivent à échéance.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. Are you talking about the detention with CBSA?
Yeah,
Okay.
For migrants.
Okay, oui, je comprends, mais c'est essentiel. Okay, no, that's right. Et c'est okay en anglais, just parce que these issues are very technical and very difficult. So there's a number of different items at play here. There's been certain provinces, particularly those who have no or a very small number of people who found themselves in immigration detention, who have decided not to use the provincial systems. There's obviously been certain cases, including very tragic cases, where people have found themselves in detention in a facility that did not have the capacity to deal with their needs. We're going to be working with CBSA to identify the right path forward. My own view is that immigration detention should be a last resort, absolutely, for somebody who did not commit a criminal offense. Now, if someone, in fact, has committed a criminal offense, they should be subjected to the punishment outlined in our criminal laws. But we have to find a different and better path forward, in my view, to deal with individuals who may be detained for violations of immigration law when there's some kind of an alternative. There may be some unique scenarios where there in fact is a danger to the public or a public safety or security threat, and those need to be dealt with very seriously because we cannot risk the safety and well-being of Canadians. But for individual cases that do not involve a public safety threat, we need to continue to work, and I've had many conversations with Minister Mendicino to identify a path forward, but that's a discussion that we need to continue to work towards before we come up with a permanent solution.
Ça arrive à échéance à certains contrats avec ces gens-là dans le monde.
Et je serais répété plus loin, s'il vous plaît.
Excusez-moi. Certains de ces contrats-là avec les provinces et les centres de détention arrivent à échéance très rapidement.
J'ai fait du travail avec des provinces, mais c'est difficile quand des provinces font une annonce avant le moment que le gouvernement fédéral est prêt pour adresser les conséquences de ces décisions. Mais c'est la décision pour des provinces. Il y a un contrat avec quelques provinces pour des services. Mais dans l'avenir, je veux chercher une solution nouvelle pour adresser la situation sociale avec des personnes. It's challenging, but we do have contracts with provinces. If they decide it's not the path forward for them, then we will have to accommodate. But in any event, I think we're of like minds with some of these provinces, and we want to find a solution that minimizes the use of immigration detention altogether where possible.
Do you have an update on the 15,000 people we're supposed to take in when we modify the safe third country with the United States? What's the update on that one?
So this is something that we're still working to finalize the policy design for the 15,000. There's a few questions that we need to continue to answer about whether we'll look for particular family connections, whether we're going to be looking to start something that will engage both humanitarian and economic concerns, which will have the potential to snowball into a bigger, more successful program in the future. But we expect to be engaging with our American colleagues as soon as next week on next steps. I'm trying to figure out, depending on the sitting of the House, I may actually have the opportunity to visit my counterparts in Washington next week. It'll depend on scheduling that is not necessarily up to me with the House of Commons.
And quickly, 15,000, is it per year or is it in total?
So it's for the first year, but there is no requirement under the agreement to do it each year. Okay. But of course, if we identify new solutions that help solve problems and promote regular migration within the hemisphere that can address this, that's actually actually a problem that we want to solve, not just because we struck a deal with the United States on the Canada-US border, but because it's important. Irregular migration, I don't know if folks understand how serious this is. There are 100 million displaced people in the world. This problem is not going away. People are going to continue to seek a better life for themselves when they face violence, war, persecution, but also poverty or a quality of life that they and their children think they can outperform in another location. If we continue to grow regular migration pathways, particularly for vulnerable people, we can encourage more people to take a safe journey for themselves. When I hear stories, not just about the Canada-US border, but families going through the Darien Gap, risking their lives in very dangerous environments, it's something that I think we have a moral obligation to address in partnership with countries in the world stage, and this is just the next step in that process.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
merci tout le monde. À la prochaine.
Anything more on the, since it's today, not yesterday, the choice for the Supreme Court Justice? Is there anything in the toolbox that you're looking for, a Westerner, criminal skills? You know, I'm just asking.
Those are, and those would be great questions to ask the Attorney General. My understanding is we're going to activate the independent advisory process quickly. We recognize having a vacancy on the court at this particular moment is not advisable. There's never a good time to be down a justice. So our hope would be we could have a list of highly respected, functionally bilingual jurists from the region that Justice Brown represented by the fall or before the fall session of the court. I think that's everything I've understood.
What do you think of the Blanc-Québécois proposal for a public inquiry and some of the names they put forward for potential commissioners?
I saw a quick copy of Monsieur Blanchet's letter. I think it's a constructive effort to advance the conversation. The names, premier regard, are not unreasonable. So I'm hoping, I had a brief chat with the Bloc Québécois a few moments ago. It's in my view, a positive step forward. Obviously, the terms of reference around such an inquiry are also important, but we take it as a constructive, positive suggestion.
Mais est-ce qu'il y a des noms qui vous parlent plus que d'autres dans cette courte liste-là?
Écoutez, on ne va pas négocier des noms. Je sais que vous êtes beaucoup intéressés, puis je suis beaucoup tenté, en effet, mais on ne va pas discuter de noms précis, parce qu'à ma connaissance, ces personnes n'ont même pas peut-être été approchées. Est-ce qu'ils ont accepté? J'ai aucune idée. Mais c'est des noms à premier regard qui sont raisonnables. On a pris la lettre de M. Blanchet comme un effort constructif d'avancer la conversation. Franchement, c'est quelque chose qui manquait au cours des dernières semaines. Alors, je pense que c'est une base de continuer la conversation. C'est des noms qui sont intéressants. Ce pas des noms qui sont à premier regard déraisonnables, mais moi, je n'ai pas parlé à ces gens-là. Il faut d'ailleurs, comme j'ai dit, la personne ou les personnes est une question. Mais ensuite, avoir les termes de référence responsables qui vont s'assurer que ces renseignements hautement protégés par la loi canadienne peuvent être traités de la façon appropriée. Je n'ai pas vu des suggestions au contraire, mais pour nous, comme gouvernement responsable, ça demeure une question importante. Pas de raison de croire qu'on ne peut pas se mettre d'accord peut-être sur ça aussi. We haven't agreed to anything. Maybe you and I haven't agreed to anything. So what I'm saying...
You're talking about making choices for... Sure. What's it going to be? Is it going to be an inquiry?
But that's exactly the kind of conversation we want to have with the opposition parties and those with a lot of experience in this area. It's sort of like Sesame Street. Some of these things aren't like the others. So every public inquiry is not the same. A public inquiry in a highly sensitive, protected area of national security is different than another public inquiry. So the terms of reference are important. The kind of person or persons who would lead such an effort are also very important. I'm encouraged by the kind of conversations we're having. We always thought that it's important to have a public process, public inquiry potentially, public process that will reassure Canadians that we've strengthened our democratic institutions, that we've taken steps to ensure that foreign interference does not determine the outcome of elections. So I'm encouraged by the Bloc Québécois letter, and I'm encouraged by other informal conversations I've had, but that's the work that I'm here to do this week.
The Access to Information Commissioner released another very critical report of the government's handling of that file today. All cabinet ministers have a role in their departments about how to handle these requests. How do you explain the fact that, 7-8 years in now, the Liberals have fallen far short of their big promises they made in 2015 to be open and transparent and get documents out open by default, all that stuff. The Commissioner says that's not happening.
Well, I think if you think back 8 years ago, I hope you'll conclude that the government is much more open and transparent. The simple fact that I'm standing here answering your questions and that my boss does regularly in the run of a week speaks to a desire to be open and accessible. We also understand the importance of the access to information legislation being respected and applied in an expeditious way. I haven't read the Commissioner's report. I think my colleague, the President of the Treasury Board, and others could perhaps speak to the specifics. But every time an independent officer of Parliament on something as important as access to information identifies challenges and problems, I would think a responsible government that wants to be open by default would want to see how we can work to improve all of those areas, but I haven't seen this.
What's the timeline for an inquiry decision about whether or not you're going to actually have one, or whatever the next steps are when it comes to looking into election interference?
Our hope in a perfect scenario is that by the time Parliament would adjourn, we would have agreed upon at least the basic parameters and ideally a person or persons. The details of how these things are worked out and what is the specific mandate, if we found the right person or persons, presumably they too would want to have views on, perhaps consult on, the kind of terms of reference, the timelines. So improvising and accelerating a process in a way that gets you a less than ideal outcome isn't what we want. But we recognize that Mr. Johnson's departure shouldn't be a reason to delay the process. I'm hopeful by the end of next week we can do the work to at least be in a position to announce the next steps of the public process. But I alone won't be able to determine whether we meet that timeline, but I certainly hope that I'm not an empêchement or a delay as to why we can't get there.
D'ici la fin de la semaine prochaine, vous pensez être capable de franchir la prochaine étape?
Mais de définir, moi, Valérie, de définir les prochaines étapes, de se mettre d'accord sur les lignes, par exemple, des termes de référence générales. Mais, on n'a pas approché quelqu'un, il n'y a personne qui a dit « Ah oui, moi je me porte bénévole ». Alors il faut voir si on peut arriver à un consensus sur la personne ou les personnes. Il faut demander probablement, cette personne-là va vouloir avoir une opinion sur l'échéancier, les termes de référence, peut-être consulter d'autres experts. Moi, j'ai jamais présidé une telle enquête, alors je ne sais pas les étapes que la personne ou les personnes vont suivre, mais si on peut se mettre d'accord, les partis d'opposition avec le gouvernement, avec l'avis de d'autres Canadiens qui ont d'expérience sur les prochaines étapes, quitte à finaliser les détails au fil des semaines qui vont suivre. Moi, je serais tout à fait content, avant que j'arrive à Shediac pour l'été. J'ai 2 graduations dans ma circonscription le week-end prochain. Moi, je serais bien content que les gens voient qu'on a avancé d'une façon importante ces questions. Bonne journée, au revoir.
Les prisons provinciales, cette entente que vous avez avec les provinces pour incarcérer des migrants, les provinces mettent fin à ces ententes-là. Qu'est-ce que vous allez faire? Ces gens-là, on les incarcérer, on les incarcérera plus, on fait quoi?
Nous sommes en train de négocier avec les provinces un programme de transition parce que quelques des provinces a indiqué à le gouvernement fédéral qu'il veut arrêter les ententes sur la question de détention des nouveaux arrivants des immigrants. Donc, je pense que nous sommes dans un bon espace, dans un espace constructif avec quelques des provinces. Et pour le long terme, nous sommes en train de regarder, étudier avec beaucoup d'attention quelques réformations sous la loi que nous pouvons utiliser la détention comme un dernier recours. Et on avait fait beaucoup de progrès pendant les dernières années. On avait réduit les chiffres de détention. Donc, je pense que nous sommes dans un bon espace avec les provinces et territoires, mais il y a plus de travail à faire.
Est-ce qu'il y a des détenus qui pourront être encore transférés, par exemple, de Halifax à un centre de détention au Manitoba, ou on va essayer de limiter ça?
Ça, c'est exactement les questions logistiques que nous sommes en train de étudie avec les provinces. Il y a peut-être des autres options, autres solutions qui est plus efficace, mais sur le principe, il faut utiliser les détentions comme une dernière écoute. Il faut toujours, comme un objectif maximum, protéger les communautés s'il y a des risques qui est là, mais on va continuer ensemble avec les provinces et territoires.
On access to information, the Commissioner had another report today that was very critical of the government. All ministers have a role in encouraging transparency in their departments. Why has the government fallen so short of the big promises it made in 2015 to be open by default, improve access to information, get documents out there?
Look, I think it's important that we continue to double our efforts when it comes to being open and transparent, and the access to information regime is a critical component of that objective. I will say that the RCMP, which is one of the lead agencies within my portfolio, has made some progress on that, especially with regards to some complaints by adding a capacity and turning the response to those complaints more quickly around. That was in the wake of a court decision, which again shone a light on some of the concerns around delays and et cetera. So I do think we need to put appropriate emphasis and resources into responding to access to information requests in a timely fashion, and that's something that we'll do.
The RCMP has said it's launched an investigation into the targeting of Michael Chong. What does this say to you about, the seriousness of the situation of foreign interference right now?
I understand that from his testimony this morning before PROC that Commissioner Duhaime did confirm to committee members and to the public that there is an ongoing investigation into the allegations of foreign interference and Mr. Chong. Obviously, I will continue to respect operational independence, and for details about that investigation, we'll defer to the RCMP. But I do think it reflects the sobriety with which, the seriousness with which the government is taking this issue, and we will do whatever we can to continue to equip the RCMP to do the work around holding those who are accountable for foreign interference or any other types of activities which could undermine national security to account.
I can ask you about Bernardo, and the question is, why weren't you told about his transfer until after it happened, and why did you call the commissioner later than that? We're trying to figure that out, please.
Well, first I want to clarify that there is back and forth between the Correctional Services of Canada and the department when it comes to decisions around transfers, and so in this particular case of Paul Bernardo, there was back and forth in the lead up to the decision. I personally found out the week that the decision was rendered. It's important as well to underscore that these decisions are not typically public because of security concerns, because of privacy concerns that are well established in the law. But once the decision to transfer Paul Bernardo did become public, I obviously took the opportunity to express very clearly to the Commissioner the concerns of Canadians in regards to the transfer of that decision.
Just the Deputy Commissioner also said that file for Mr. Chong and the targeting of him and his family by China was on his desk quite some time ago. So is there any clarification as to why the RCMP is only pursuing this investigation now?
Well, again, I would underscore that operational independence means that those questions are best put to the RCMP. But I do think that Commissioner Duhaime's update to the committee today that they are looking into this allegation does reflect that they take this issue very seriously. I would also underscore that in recent months, the government has introduced a national coordinator to fight against foreign interference that's being led out of the Public Safety Canada Department, that we have conducted a public consultation when it comes to the creation of a foreign agent registry, and certainly we have signaled our intent to make sure that we introduce that legislation, but we've got to do it in the right way, sensitive to the concerns that have been expressed by diaspora communities who are the targets of foreign interference. And finally, there is approximately $49 million in Budget 2023 to give more resources to the RCMP to protect communities and Canadians from foreign interference. So this is a full court press. This is a very complex and insidious challenge to our national security, and we will continue to do everything within our powers to ensure that we push that threat back and protect our democratic institutions and protect Canadians from foreign interference. Thank you very much.
Peuvent pas avoir accès à la page de ces médias sur Facebook. Ça vous dit quoi?
Ben, c'est une attaque directe à notre démocratie. C'est une tentative d'intimidation. Ils essaient d'intimider un gouvernement souverain qui prend des décisions, ils essaient d'intimider les sénateurs, parce que ça arrive exactement au même moment où le projet de loi vient de sortir du comité du Sénat. Et c'est complètement inacceptable.
Mais à part
Okay. It's a clear attack on our democracy, and they're trying to intimidate a sovereign government. They're trying to intimidate the government of Canada. They're trying to intimidate the senators that are actually working on a bill. And it happens exactly at the same moment that bill comes out of the Senate committee.
À part dire que c'est inacceptable, qu'est-ce que vous pouvez faire? Vous achetez de la publicité sur Facebook?
Toutes les options sont sur la table.
Oui, mais
non, mais je ne ferai pas de la stratégie. Non, attendez, là. Vraiment, je ne prendrai aucune décision basée sur la menace. Ce qu'ils font là, c'est des menaces. C'est clair ce qu'ils font, là. On le voit. Et je n'ai jamais pris de décision basée sur la menace, je ne le ferai pas non plus.
Mais c'est pas une menace.
On va regarder toutes les options ouvertes. Je les ai rencontrés, ils ont mon numéro de téléphone.
Mais là, vous tentez de les rejoindre?
Ils ont mon numéro de téléphone, je vous explique. Je les ai rencontrés dès le début. J'ai rencontré Facebook, j'ai rencontré Google pour parler du projet de loi. Moi, je leur ai dit, vous m'appelez quand vous voulez. Google m'a recontacté, on s'est rencontrés. Facebook, à moins que je me trompe, mais Facebook n'a jamais essayé de me reparler. Il parle par contre à mes fonctionnaires sur une base régulière.
Est-ce que vous leur avez parlé aujourd'hui? C'est quand la dernière fois que vous leur avez parlé?
Mon cabinet, je pense, la semaine dernière, là. On leur parle régulièrement. Mon cabinet leur parle.
Senators just made some amendments to C-18. Have you had a brief on that?
No, yeah, no, just came out of cabinet, sorry. But it's a good bill, I can tell you that.